to record it, so that's great. Thank you for the reminder. So I'll just go back to the screen. So so ultimately, you get someone say to you, I've just tested positive. Your first question is, when did you take the test? And they'll say, we took the test on Monday. So your first thought is, great, that probably doesn't impact my setting because you were not in my setting in the 48 hours before. But then you ask the second question, which was, when were you unwell when you took the test or in any period before? Now, if the person reports that they were unwell in the 5 days before the test, with a thing like a really severe headache, that they felt really fatigued and ill in themselves, diarrhea can also come up, that they had joint pain or muscle ache, and then sore throats is also a really common one. If they report in the 5 days before the positive test that they had any of those symptoms, we go from that date. If it's quite clear they were unwell, sometimes I'll say, well, I felt run down, but it wasn't anything more than usual. I mean, stuff like that you can negate because we're all exhausted. But things like a sore throat, a headache, a severe headache, diarrhea, and that feeling of the really feeling really ill in yourself, and just which I know a lot of us feel it quite a lot these days. But in the previous phase to a positive test, we would likely take that as the start of your illness. So just to kind of run you through the period of infection. So you would take the day that they fell ill as day 0. So when they started to become ill, then you would trace everyone in the 2 days before, and then you would class the 10 days after. So what we find in some schools at the minute, that the parent will bring the child into school even though they're waiting for a test result, and even though the child has been unwell. So if the child has been in school on the Wednesday, say, and you'll get a report that they've now tested positive, you ask them, when did they take the test? And they took the test on the Monday. So you go, okay, great. Potentially that I have to isolate everyone from the Monday to the Wednesday because they've been in, even though we know that they've tested positive. But if they then report that they also felt unwell in the week previously with things like a sore throat and a headache, you would isolate any contacts from those previous days as well. So it's looking at not just the day that they had the test, it's also the days that they had symptoms. And if they continue to break the rules and come to school even though they've had a test, you would isolate anyone that's been with them for the 10 days after as well. But they would self-isolate if they've developed symptoms from the first day of their symptoms. So there's another question of, okay, well, how far do I track back? Because, if they've been unwell for quite some time, they may have already completed their isolation period. So what we do is we use any of those clear symptoms up to 5 days before that they tested. And it's doing a little bit of an investigation because some parents know this guidance, and some parents, as we found in the region, that they'll make up a date in which symptoms started, so that by the time they tell you, it's already at the end of the isolation period and they're trying to claim that they need to be in school now. So if you feel that the time before they tested is, you're not sure at which point they were infectious, because the parent is reporting that they've been ill, for weeks before they tested, then at that point we would just default back to the test date because it's too unsure of when it was that they definitely became unwell. So just to kind of give some information there. So if the person reported a sore throat, so here's an example, on the Tuesday, didn't come to work on the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then tested positive on the Saturday, we would identify all close contacts who were with them on that Tuesday and the Tuesdays before, which would include just the Monday if it's a school setting. If the person tested positive on a Saturday and they didn't have any symptoms, we use the Saturday and we'd isolate anyone who was in the 48 hours before. Now, in this case, this person was not in school from the Wednesday, and as such, there would be no actions in school because they weren't in the 48 hours before they tested. So that's in your toolkit. That's an example of how to investigate a positive case. The first thing is, when did they test? Did they have any symptoms, and which date did it start? And then you start to contact trace. So that's the next one, is who are my close contacts? So here in the close contacts flowchart, you'll see it includes anyone who's been within 1 metre face-to-face having a conversation, anyone who's been coughed on, or anyone who's had skin-to-skin contact. But that said, you can be within a metre and not face to face. So if you're doing like a breakfast club, or you've had to reach over someone to get a stapler, or you've had to help a child with their juice carton, at that point you would not class them as a close contact until they've been in their immediate within the metre for a minute and over. And a minute and over is quite a long time for transient contact. So that's where we don't in class as crossing in corridors as close contacts. We don't class anything sort of just a quick fleeting contact as close contacts unless they're face to face. The next one is when they've been within 2 meters but wider than 1 meter for 15 minutes. So this is when you have sort of that chance conversation in a corridor. During this phase of COVID now, as the cases are rising, we need to get a lot hotter on this. So if you can get your staff or all of you become really, really hot on what is a 2 meter distance and start to really become almost obsessive about that and keeping wider than 2 meters. And if you're within a meter, within 2 meters, you can't do that for any longer than 15 minutes. And I was actually informed yesterday by PHE that they've changed the guidance on this. And where before it was if you were 15 minutes like in one go, but now they're saying that if you had multiple conversations with the same person for a little snap of time and a little snap of time and a little snap of time, now they're saying that time's cumulative. So if you've been working with someone throughout the day and being within 2 meters of them, if you sort of set a stopwatch and say, okay, well, at this point, we kept within 15 minutes. So we kept cutting the conversation when it came to 15 minutes. Now they're not classing that as they are classing that as a close contact if you keep visiting them within their space and they've been positive. So that's some new guidance which came out yesterday. And then obviously the last one is if you share a car. If you share a car with anyone, doesn't matter if you've got the windows open, masks on or whatever, you are a close contact. So and then as we covered, it's you're a close contact if you're with them in the 48 hours before they developed symptoms or were tested, or in the 10 days after. If you're not any of those, then you're not a close contact. And we have had some people informed by Test and Trace that even though they were with someone a week before they developed symptoms, to self-isolate. So it's worth knowing this inside out, because sometimes people from like Test and Trace do get it wrong. One thing around this now for schools is where it says do not test unless you become unwell. We are now starting to change that and flex that across the county. So I've been working quite closely with the regional testing unit about capacity, and a lot more of our schools now we are asking them to we're sending out letters to parents to say test if you have any symptoms, and if you're isolating and they develop symptoms, definitely test any symptoms if you're isolating as a close contact. So send me an email if that's something you're interested in introducing into your school, especially if you've had more than a couple of cases, definitely. So the next one is the query around outbreaks. So just to bring it back onto this one. Is it this one? No, it's this one. Okay, the next one is about outbreaks. So we've already covered reporting on the Tuesday sessions, but just to cover it again. So if you have any cases in your school, report it to this online. And obviously, if you need any help or assistance throughout the day, email educationcorona@warwickshire.gov.uk. If it's of a weekend and it's out of hours, there's a manned inbox at dphadmin@warwickshire.gov.uk, and that runs on a Saturday and Sunday from 8 till 8. There is still the DFE and the PHE helpline. So obviously you've still got those, and they also run, I think, up until about 8 o'clock of an evening. So if you do want any advice, you can also go to them. So just to kind of keep you in the loop of that. If you do have a couple of cases, we've got a lot of people who are quite scared of, like, when does it become an outbreak? When do I get, what do I have to do? So any 2 cases in a setting is classed as an outbreak, but there are different levels of what we get of when we get quite fearful about an outbreak. So you may have an outbreak and it's just 2 cases, and it's really clear why you have 2 cases. So it may be 2 children in the same class who are already friends and already really close contacts. So for that reason, you might already know that you're going to have those 2 close contacts, and they make sense that the one person's transferred it to the other and you've got 2 cases and they're linked. And outbreaks like that, when it's just a couple of cases, we have a lot less fear over. Then you might have a situation whereby you've got a case in a class, you send the entire class home, so or the group or the close contacts home, and you get case after case after case in those close contacts. Again, that's technically an outbreak because it's multiple cases, but there aren't further cases within your school. They are outside the setting. So they're not further cases in your school. They're already contained within the bubble that you sent off. So again, that's a low risk outbreak. It looks quite scary on paper because there's lots of positive cases, but they're already at home. It's when you get 1 case in 1 year of your school and another case in another year of your school, or you get in 1 form group and then another form group, and you're like, okay, well, let's work this out. So you investigate the cases and you find that maybe all 3 cases have been linked to a positive case at home, and that positive case had already happened at home, and therefore you can negate, actually, they are 3 chance cases across my school. Again, it looks quite scary because I've got 3 cases across 3 form groups across 3 years. Okay, but you've looked at it and you realise you know where the positives have come from. It's from a backstory within their own community setting. The only time that we get really fearful when it's an outbreak and when we want to do more digging and maybe look at further control is when, for example, you may have a 4 form year 8. So you have 1 in 1 year 8 and you remove that class and they isolate. And there is no other contacts as far as you're aware. But then in the next bubble of year 8, you get another positive. Okay, so that's fair enough. That could be a chance class. That could be a chance case. You don't know what's happened. So you remove that. Then you find that you've got a 4th one within another group, maybe in the form group. And at that point, this is start to get like there's definitely a pattern of transmission. And maybe at this point, you've got 2 other cases in year 10 that are happening. So you can start to see that it's starting to crawl. There's definitely some kind of leakage of isolation of bubbles. And in this case, that's when we class this as a high risk outbreak. So you can see there's quite a difference between a very clear outbreak that happens when they're already self-isolating, a clear outbreak when you've got more cases, but it's quite clear where it's come from. And then you've got that leakage potentially of close contacts. And so at that point, we would probably work with you on how we can put further control measures in place, how we can cut away further people and self-isolate. Again, the schools yourselves are amazing at doing this, identifying where people are and cutting that away. At that point, we might close the school year and then start to look at what else we can do around measures. But that's what we class as the more concerned outbreak, is that one where we're starting to see it spread a bit more and getting more advice on that. So the next thing is really is looking at prevention and self-isolation measures. So yeah, this is how. Yeah, go on.
Yet again, Leah.
Yeah, no, it's fine, Margot.
There's a bit of a problem with the chat panel in that not everybody on this call can actually see it. So you were wanting heads to do thumbs up. Okay. Not everybody can see it, so we just need to bear that in mind. I would imagine.
To be fair, we had like pretty much equal across all the headings anyway. So we've got 3 people liking the information about the single case, 3 people wanting multiple cases, 2 people wanting outbreaks, and 3 people wanting ways to prevent closure. So we've got kind of an equal balance.
I think they'll want you to do everything anyway.
Yeah, okay. So I think we've got about 114 on the call at the minute. So yeah, so I had a feeling that something wasn't quite right. But yeah, so I'm just covering it all. But thank you, Margot. That makes sense. So how do we prevent school closures, and how do we prevent self-isolations? Okay, so we need to be really, really military now in our schools going forward. We need to have as smaller bubbles as possible. And if it's a young setting, as in like if it's primary school, we need to grid off playgrounds so that children don't interact between the form group bubbles if possible. If you have issues with ratios of staff, you can have them play in the grids but have someone overseeing the 2. And if you do have children who do still cross play, obviously sort of tell them, that's not the way anymore, but then make a note of who those close contacts are, so you're not totally losing control over it and feeling that they've mingled lots and lots and lots and lots, and you're not sure who close contacts are. generally what we've heard from some junior school and primary schools is that once you tell them that they're only allowed in that grid, they generally, after a couple of times, they actually get used to it. I mean, you'll still have the odd time that they don't, but we need to really keep our bubbles as tight and as small as possible. The reason being is when you get a case in a class, you are more likely to be able to keep your class open and your school open with the smaller size of bubbles, because if you're in a secondary school and you have a year group bubble, which could be as much as, like, you know, some schools are like 270 children in a year bubble, or if you have smaller groups or tighter form classes as much as you can, and people have their seating plans in place and you keep it as spaced as possible, then when you send one child off to self-isolate, you will only pull away a small group with them, and instead of sending the entire year home, because if you send the entire year home, it only takes 5 children to close a school, whereas when you have really tight bubbles of cases, you can have multiple cases in a school and the school can keep running for those that are left. So it just kind of show it here. I mean, obviously this is really simplistic model. So as you can see here, this child is unwell and these groups are protected because they don't mix with these other children. And when you've got a situation where you're not sure who they're mixing with, then there's a fear that they would all need to go off as close contacts. Sometimes you can identify, as we did today with a primary school, you can't identify everyone that they have been in contact because there's fear that they've had contact where they've mixed with all. But you can identify those that they definitely haven't mixed with, because I know my son is in reception and I know generally which children he generally plays with on a day-to-day basis. And there are children that I know he never plays with. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's always the opportunity for that, but it's very, very limited. Generally, on a day-to-day basis, he plays with the same groups of children. So by having this model where you grid off your playgrounds or whatever, where you sort of limit who they can mix with, then you can put it in. You can put this situation in. Same things can happen in secondary schools. So if you ask in the lesson after break and after lunchtime for them to write in their homework books or whatever book they keep as the most stable book that they have go out through school, that they put in that book who it was that they mixed with in that lunch or in that break, you can say quite definitively in your break times and your lunch time who that child was actually playing with and mixing with in school. Because at the minute, my fear is that so many schools are keeping very large bubbles and very large groups that it really doesn't take much for the whole thing to topple. And so if we keep them as small as we can and as tight as we can, and we document who their close contacts were or are in that school day, and we get access to that, so when they fall unwell, we get access to that, then we are able to just cut away those that we know are close contacts and cut away those that are in the general vicinity within their class, and the rest of the year, which are whole classes, can remain in school. And that's my fear, really, is that the main way that's coming up at the minute to keep schools open is that. Now, we also have issues around teachers and teaching staff. And what we find is once it's got hold in teachers, once teachers have started to become, multiple teachers become unwell, that is when it does seed quite deeply in a school. So all I can say to this is mark your floors if you haven't done already. Make sure your staff totally understand what a 2-meter distance is and isn't. For them to keep their own records, as much as you're noting the kids that the staff are not, they're not separate to all of this. I know we're all really tired and we're fed up of COVID. I know I am. And I know some head teachers that I spoke to this week are absolutely exhausted because they haven't had a half term as a result of this. But ultimately, it creates more work when you've got cases in class and you're having to run stuff from home and whatever, than it is if they're able to just keep within their 2 meters, Don't go within the class. Don't walk through a classroom of kids. If they need to have books or stuff back, that they do it either transiently where the kids drop it off as they walk out the class, or it's placed on their, the desks as they come in. You do it very transiently. We don't stop at any desks. I mean, ideally, you don't even walk into the class at all. You stay at your 2-meter radius. That when they're sat at a desk, you know where their 2 meters ends. That they don't mix between each other in the staff room, and that it's even having almost like prefect teachers to tell other teachers not to mix. And this can happen at any informal area of the school that isn't marked out. And it's almost like you need to audit the teachers, and definitely express to teachers, do not meet outside of school. Do not meet up. Even when lockdown ends, do not meet up. And I understand that, we're all friends in school and we want to keep friends in school. But the viability of a leadership team is massively impacted by the number of teachers who become unwell and then are pulled in as close contacts. It's an absolute nightmare. So just appeal to the, to the teachers that do not mix, and be responsible outside of school to not bring it into school where you can. I'm not blaming anyone who becomes unwell, but we have to work really hard that if anyone, has any situation whereby they are mingling with other staff, that needs to be locked down and stopped immediately. We are reaching more cases in this in the county, definitely within the country, and the only way to do it in this setting is to make sure that teachers are as militant as the pupils in this situation. Now, I can say, I'm going to say today, and I'm going to say on the Tuesday call, that if you have any teachers who wish to test who are unwell for any reason, then allow them to go and test. And I can put the guidance into the chat box or email it after this to share with you how you can get a test. And it's basically saying public health has asked you to test. I keep checking in with the testing centre to see what our capacity is like in the county. It's fine. So if you've got any teachers who are unwell for any reason or wish to get a test for any reason, they can go and get a test. So let's lock down our teachers. Let's get them, everyone. I mean, you're working all so hard. It's not taking anything away from that, but let's get them all working sort of to sort of keep this more contained in the school. And the last one is about the NHS app. So the NHS app has a Bluetooth element. It will tell you when you've been a close contact, which is great, except for when your phone is not with you as a person. It is kept somewhere else. So it may be the fact that it's in your handbag and you're in an office, and next to your office is where all the visitors come. It's where all the parents come. It's so basically every time anyone stands in the main reception as an office member, your phone bings if any of them test positive, because you know that visitors don't always tell you when they've been positive. That can actually cause your staff to need to self-isolate because their phones are not near the staff members. It's left in a handbag under a desk, which could be classed as a close contact as people come in and out of doors. In the same way, if anyone puts their phones in lockers or use them in porter cabins, or if they're sort of just stored anywhere else that's not their person, I recommend that they suspend the Bluetooth element of the app while they are in school, because we are having so many teachers now that are being pinged to self-isolate and they don't know why. And we don't know for sure whether there could be other external reasons, like the way the schools lay out, where their belongings are kept and where their mobile phones kept, and whether visitors can ping it. Children's own mobile phones could ping their phone because it's in a crosswalk area in the school that, that through a wall, as in like a thin perspex kind of glass wall, they're able to then sort of read the Bluetooth and then cause their phone to ping. So I do recommend that during the workday to keep your team as in school as much as possible. That you're able to that you turn that off in work if you know that your staff members are not able to be with their phone. And the way it works, just so you know, is if ever you have it come up with a number, it will say for example, it says you've got 9 days that you need to isolate. Now we know that the isolation period is 14 days. That means that your exposure was 5 days previously. So if you're given that as information, you can track back and try and work out who your exposure was. Sometimes in schools we have overridden the information because we've known that everyone's had their mobile phone together in a locker, and then there has been a positive in that group, and we know that staff weren't together. It's because they're all within 2 meters in a locker. So we have overridden some things, but only when we've known that there was a positive and we